Welcome to this compilation of 4 short stories about Tenebrous technology. I'll be narrating The Creature Inside by Jack Sharkey, No Shield from the Dead by Gordon R. Dickson, No Substitutions by Jim Harmon, and Irresistible Weapon by H.B. Fyfe. If you find yourself enjoying these stories and want to listen to more of my narrations, there are hundreds more on this channel. Make sure to subscribe here and head to my Substack where there are extra stories that don't get published on YouTube. In addition, I've narrated a few novels by modern sci-fi authors available on Amazon, and there are also narrations of short stories from the Keystone Codex, which features some of the best indie authors today. Links to all those things, Substack, audiobook novels, and Keystone Codex, can be found in the description below. But for now, let's get to the stories, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. The Creature Inside by Jack Sharkey, narrated by William Skye. The room was small, but it held a whole universe, and Norcris had no place in it. Chapter 1. "How much did they tell you about the fix we're in?" said Dr. Alan Burgess to his visitor. Lieutenant Jerry Norcris shook his head. "They said you'd fill me in. They said it was urgent." Burgess paused, lighted a cigarette, then belatedly offered one to Jerry, who declined. "Well," he said, interspersing his words with short, nervous puffs of smoke, "about a year ago, I stumbled on a way to reverse the process of an electroencephalograph, to play pre-recorded thoughts and experiences to a man's mind. You zoologists, with your contact process for penetrating newly discovered fauna's minds, will be familiar with the process. Luckily for us." Jerry eyed him. "Go on." "My development involves an infinitely selective feedback. We give the subject a saturating dose of inflowing concepts. His mind is free to choose among them and to link them. Take bigness, affluence, and danger, for an instance. The subject puts them together and fleshes them out. He could experience a large, expensive fission bomb falling onto him, or he could be sacrificed to an immense golden idol, or anything that his inner mind chose." "I begin to understand," said Jerry. "The overlay influences all the senses. The subject thinks he's really undergoing whatever he conjures up, and you use it for therapy, letting him work off his aggressions and frustrations in what seems to him an actual universe." "Correct, except for the tense," said Alan Burgess. "I was doing that until Monday of this week." He leaned forward across the desk. "We screen the subjects carefully because certain psychoses could be disastrous to the subject in my device. Paranoia, for instance. The man would be amid unutterable horrors with danger on every side. He'd emerge a gibbering idiot if he didn't die of heart failure first." "Emerge?" asked Jerry, frowning. "I'd assumed you used a helmet, such as we do in Contact." Burgess sighed. "Unfortunately, I am paying the penalty of lone wolf experimentation. I wish I'd had the sense to route the input to the brain through a helmet, but I didn't. Instead, I installed the person in an observation room. The influencing factor was nutrition. Intravenous feedings wouldn't have served the purpose of the observer. Sometimes the subject's choice of foodstuffs is significant. He had to be let move about, his mind in a make-believe world, but his body actually moving about a room we could see into. So, I had an atomic duplicator installed. The hospital got one last year for making radium, turning cancerous growths into normal flesh, regrowing bone and the like. Should the subject then grow hungry, the duplicator would be triggered by his conviction of eating. In his mind, he might be hanging from a branch by his tail, for instance. The duplicator's production of bananas, coconuts, or whatever would give us a further clue to his state of mind. You see?" "So far sound enough, Dr. Burgess," said Jerry. "So what went wrong?" "I assume something did, or I wouldn't be here." "We made a terrible error. We tried observing a man named Anthony Mawson in our gadget. I'd diagnosed his case as simple inferiority complex. My fault. Wrong diagnosis. Mawson has megalomania, a gorgeous case of it. Of course, he's not the first such case to fool psychiatrists. You see, his outward shyness, soft-spoken voice, and general gawkishness is due to feeling superior to others, not the reverse. He feels smarter, stronger, braver, etc. than everybody else in creation, but he also feels that nobody knows it but himself. Hence his indrawing, his brooding, taciturn gentility. Jerry Norcris prodded. What happened with Mawson when you put him in your machine? I don't know, said Burgess. No one's been able to see into the machine since he entered it on Monday. He couldn't have escaped? No, I wish he had. Anthony Mawson is still in that room in his own private universe, and we can't get him out of it. We've tried cutting power to the machine. The opacity inside the room remains. We sent 2 men in after him. They never came out. How could he possibly? Asked Jerry. Burgess shook his head. We can only guess. Our theory is that he's used the duplicator to make the entire room self-sustaining. Normally we could wait till he runs out of material to feed the duplicator, but we can't wait on the lives of those 2 men, nor can we chance his expanding his universe. Norcris frowned. Expanding it? Burgess nodded. By perhaps feeding the duplicator with the room itself. With a pickaxe he can start hewing down the very walls, or even have the duplicator build a robot that will take care of its need for material to build with. Against this development we have surrounded the room completely with a force shield, limiting his outward progress to 2 feet of concrete in any direction. But the room is approximately 30 feet square and 20 feet high. With all that mass, he could exist in there for years. And my job is to get him out, said Jerry. Yes, the government feels that a contact specialist's the only kind of man to send into this madman's world. You men are used to extrasomatic experiences, and you have learned to live with danger without losing your heads. Well, said Jerry, getting up, I guess that sums up the situation sufficiently. Burgess nodded sadly. Any further briefing is useless. Impossible, really. I've told you the situation, and you can certainly imagine the danger. But as for the solution, well, you'll just have to feel your way and do whatever you think best. Jerry paused beside Burgess at the door to the hall. One thing, though, Doctor. When I get into the influence of the machine, what kind of universe will I be in? Mine or Mawson's? I can only theorize on that, said Burgess. My guess would be that you'll find both in there, one vying for supremacy over the other. This fight won't be man to man. It will be universe against universe. Chapter 2. There had been no sensation at all as Jerry stepped through the flat sheet of greyness in the doorway. No more physical awareness than a blind man might feel when passing through the beam of a powerful light. Perhaps there was a slight sensation of the mere presence of the energies that kept the opacity in existence, but that sensation, Jerry knew, was psychological, not actual. Although, he realized as his world became an infinity of opalescent grey, in this place a psychological awareness will be no different from a genuine physical sensation. Better be careful what I think about in this psychokinetic fog. The thought was barely formulated when the greyness changed. It became moist against his flesh and started swirling in tendrils about him. Damn it, be careful, he belatedly cautioned his mind. Now the stuff is fog. Ahead of him in the swirling mist, a brighter-than-grey glow led his footsteps forward. He found himself standing beneath an overhanging marquee. Its black undersurface was runneled with condensed moisture amid the garish naked bulbs that haloed the wet cement sidewalk. A red-coated doorman, resplendent behind rows of bright brassy buttons, gave him a smile as he pulled open the door that led to the club. Jerry nodded and went inside. Thick crimson carpet cushioned his footfalls as he moved cautiously through an empty lobby, then down a white marble staircase toward the ballroom. Dimly he was aware that the band at the far end of the mammoth room was playing music. What song he didn't know until a chance chording reminded him of a popular song of the day, at which point that suddenly was the tune. The tables ringing the dance floor were covered with bright linen and shining silver. The tables were empty of patrons, however, until Jerry casually thought, "I should think business would be better." Suddenly a horde of laughing couples appeared in the chairs, with hurrying waiters bringing champagne, trays, and menus to their guests. The men wore tuxedos, the women were in evening dress. He looked suddenly at himself and saw that his uniform was now the official dress uniform of the Space Corps. Before he could conquer it, his mind voiced a quick wish that he shouldn't be dining alone, and then a girl was rising from her place at a table beside the dance floor, hurrying to greet him, hands outstretched. Her fingers were small and strong and warm. She smiled up at him. "Jerry, darling." Despite her being only arm's length from him, he could not see her well at all. His impression was merely one of youth, loveliness, and girlness. But then, as he tried to ascertain precisely what she looked like, hidden corners of his mind began to supply each detail an instant before his conscious quest for it, and Jerry, in a few moments, was suddenly staggered with delighted shock. Very few men are privileged to find a girl who lives up to all their dreams of perfection in a woman. Hair as soft as cobweb, as fluffy as dancing clouds, as golden as flowing honey, cascaded down about a slender alabaster throat and died in golden ripples on smooth white shoulders. Eyes the rich brown of raw chocolate gazed serenely at him from under red gold brows and jet lashes, their patrician serenity permeated with a touch of twinkling impishness. Her lips were soft and not unlike berry-stained velvet, sweet and warm and tempting, her mouth generous and tilted at the corners into a smile of greeting, obviously the result of her subduing a frank laugh of joy at seeing him. Geometrically perfect teeth flashed white as porcelain between her lips. Her gown was a shimmering midnight blue, highlighted with random sprinkles of brightly coruscating gems. Even as his lips parted to ask her name, Jerry knew it and spoke it softly. "Carol." "Listen," she said softly, tilting her head toward where the band had begun a new song. Swift, urgent, and rapturous it floated through the room, surrounded the two of them, took possession of them. Then Carol was in his arms, and Jerry was dancing out onto the floor with her. The other couples were a blur of forgotten figures that swayed. It was their song, their own private love song, the one that had been playing on the night when they both knew, suddenly, that there could be no one else for either of them but the other. As they returned to their table, Jerry realized that Carol was now garbed in a white peasant blouse and bright flowered flaring skirt, and that her hair was drawn back at the temples to expose her ears, now adorned with golden hoops. The table was in a lattice-backed booth covered with a red and white checkered cloth. The inner surface of the table held salt, pepper, grated cheese, and breadsticks, matching cruets of pale olive oil and dark vinegar. The band was now a 5-man gypsy ensemble. "Remember the first time we came here, Jerry?" asked Carol, her eyes at once upon his face and distant, dreamy. As she smiled, Jerry noticed with dull horror that one of her eyes was perceptibly lower than the other. The teeth she flashed his way were mottled with brown stains. She took hold of his fingers with her own. "Carol," he said shakily, staring at the knuckly red raw hands that clutched at his. "What's happening?" "Happening?" she said, her voice a raucous croak of amusement. "Nothing's happening. In fact, you're probably one of the dullest guys I ever got stuck with." She tossed her head petulantly. Coarse, straw-coloured hair flipped away from her thick neck. Her breath was sour with wine and miasmic with garlic. "Carol!" he cried. "Don't whine," she snapped viciously. "I hate a guy who whines." With that, she shoved out of the booth and waddled toward the rear of the coffee house, one hand scratching at a bulge of flesh that overhung the too-tight girdle. Her black leotards were twisted and dull as she passed the flashing rainbow lights of the brassy jukebox. Jerry shoved away from the table, overturning his coffee in its cracked china cup, and he wove his way through the reek and smoke toward the door through which she'd vanished. When he got there, the door was a peeling poster on a bare brick wall, advertising some long-forgotten show. His fingers scrabbled on rough mortar for a moment. Then he turned and paced back to his cot, where he flopped on his back in the long shadows of the bars. "No, Chris," said the guard coming into the cell. "This is it." The brass uniform buttons flashed brightly. Strong hands were lifting him from the cot, dragging him down a long corridor toward a steel door. As they got there, the door opened wide, and Jerry saw the gaping maw of hungry steel gears, while behind him a man's voice droned prayers. Then, before the guard could shove Jerry forward into that waiting mechanical mouth, Jerry noticed the odd shimmer of greyness that lay between himself and the waiting teeth, and he remembered that he was in a world of illusion. At precisely that moment, he knew beyond a doubt that those waiting jaws were illusion in form only. An atomic duplicator does not have to chew its intake. It merely dissolves the atomic bonds with the rays that flash between its power plates on either side of the disruption platform. The waiting mouth and teeth were mere symbols in Jerry's mind of what was about to occur. They were unreal, but they could be fatal. He shut his eyes, shoved backward with his feet, and thought of Carol as he'd first glimpsed her. When he opened his eyes once more, she was standing before him in her ballroom gown again, and the band was just beginning to play their song once more. "Jerry," she said, taking his arm, "dance with me." "No, we're in danger here. Come on, I'll get your coat. We've got to go away quickly." A spark of alarm showed briefly in her eyes. Then she nodded wordlessly and hurried up the marble staircase with him to the lobby. Jerry got her coat from the check room, a marvellous silvery fur that covered her from neck to waist, and then they were heading out into the fog together. "Good evening to you, sir," said the doorman, eyes and buttons bright. Jerry grunted and led Carol off down the street into the fog. "Where are we going?" she asked, breathlessly trying to keep pace. "Away, I hope," he said. Even their movement from the ballroom could be sheer illusion. Jerry tried moving from the club entrance in the exact reverse of the motion in which he'd first approached it, trying to achieve the real doorway that led from the experimental room into the antiseptic hospital corridor where Burgess waited. But the fog continued to be fog. It would not take on the form of that intangible grey shimmering that guarded the entrance to Anthony Mawson's megalomaniac universe. "If only I could see where—" he began. Then every tendril of fog was gone. Before him lay the cold blackness of outer space, pinpointed with hard, unwinking stars. Jerry recoiled from the viewplate, shaken, and turned around to see Carol. Her eyes were wide and startled as she glanced about at the metal confines of the control cabin. Jerry had just time enough to think how incongruous she looked in her fur jacket and long blue back gown, and then she was clothed in the neat grey uniform of the Wasp, trim short-sleeved shirt and sharply creased shorts. "Jerry," said Carol. She slipped her arm through his, staring at the infinite stars in the viewplate. "What are we running from?" He tried to think, but could not remember. "There's some danger behind us. We have to get away from it, Carol. It means complete destruction if we're caught." Carol stared helplessly at the stars in the viewplate. "But where are we running to?" Jerry shook his head. "Impossible to tell. Not without the help of a good astrogator. Out in space, stars shift and magnitudes change. I'm not even qualified to guess." "Sire," said the astrogator, handing a clipboard to Jerry, We can reach any of these 7 stars in a few hours. Just tell me where you'd prefer to go." Jerry turned to the man, resplendent in his neat Space Corps uniform, jacket bright with brass buttons. When he tried to focus upon the man's features, he could detect nothing. "We'd better choose the quickest trip," Jerry said after a moment's indecision. "No telling how much fuel we have left." The astrogator nodded. "I'm afraid that's out of my department, all right, sir. But if you'd care to check the tanks—" Without waiting for a reply, the man turned and began to pick his way carefully toward the rear of the spaceship, stepping from girder to girder. The floor, Jerry noticed idly as he followed, was exposed to open space between the curving ribs of steel that formed the framework of the ship. "Careful now," he said, helping Carol along from one to the other. "That's vacuum out there. We don't want to fall through." Ahead of Jerry, the implacable man with the brass buttons was nearly to the steel door masking the blast chamber where the components of fuel were mingled and ignited. Jerry, giddily aware of every hazardous step over the squares of star-speckled blackness, kept one hand on Carol's arm, the other on her chessboard. "Don't spill any of the men," she cautioned as the diminutive plastic figures danced and rattled on the board. "I don't intend to search the whole cosmos for a pawn." "Here you go, sir," said the politely insistent astrogator, opening the steel door. Before Jerry yawned an oval of intense white flame, the radiating heat crisping against his skin and hair. "The fission rate," Jerry mumbled, consulting his wristwatch. "I've got to time it or I won't be able to calculate the amount of fuel still in the bulkheads." "Count it by steps, sir," suggested the astrogator. "1," said Jerry, stepping out toward that blinding coruscation of heat. "2," he said, feeling carefully for the next girder. Then the toe of his boot slipped from the metal, and he realized, with a horrible lancing of adrenaline through his abdomen, that he was falling out the opening between the girders. The only salvation would be a shove with his still braced rear foot, but that would carry him directly into the inferno of burning fuel. An eternity of falling through icy vacuum against an instant of intolerable searing pain. "The fire!" gasped Jerry, toppling in inexorable slow motion towards starry darkness, a cloud of twirling chess pieces orbiting about his head. "I've got to make it into the fire!" He tensed the muscles of the laggard leg for the spring that would carry him to destruction, and then he saw that the chess pieces were shimmering grey, and the oval frame of the doorway to the flaming fuel was shimmering grey, and even what had seemed hot white burning was cold grey waiting mist, and with a yell of remembrance, Jerry clamped shut his eyes and let himself plunge downward into nothingness. Chapter 3. "Are you all right, Norcris?" Jerry blinked slowly, then focused on the face of Dr. Alan Burgess. He found himself lying on a narrow, white-sheeted cart in the corridor outside the room where all the trouble had begun. "Mawson," he said groggily. "Is he?" Burgess nodded wearily. "Still in there, in full control of his one-man universe. What happened, Norcris? You came tumbling out that door like a wild man, clawing the air and yelling. Then you went into shock. You've been unconscious for 2 hours. I thought I was falling," Jerry admitted. "The last thing I remember is stepping through the open space between a spaceship's supporting girders." "What open space?" said Burgess, frowning curiously. Jerry shook his head. "There isn't any such thing. But something happens to logic in that room. It's like having a dream, Doctor. Things that would startle you in everyday life seem correct, even familiar. But there's a kind of pattern to events. At first, I'm in my universe and mostly in control. Then little fragments of my pseudo-reality start slipping, changing into other things. The changes seem perfectly normal to me. Then, all at once, the guy with the brass buttons turns up, and I've managed in the nick of time twice to realize that I was about to be sent or led between the disrupting plates of your atomic duplicator." "The man with the brass buttons," Burgess said slowly. "Do you think it's Mawson?" Either him or a robot he's made to keep his machine fed. When Burgess scowled, Jerry shrugged and appended, "It is his machine for all practical purposes. He's the boss of that hungry electronic monster, Doctor, however the hospital feels about it." "This Carol, is she a real woman or a figment of your imagination, wishful thinking?" "She's real enough," Jerry sighed. "She's the personal secretary of the entire space zoology program. I take her out sometimes. There's nothing special between us." "But you wish there were," said Burgess. Jerry stared at him. "What makes you think that?" Burgess tilted his head toward the room where Mawson still maintained control. "Your vision's in there. You must think a lot of her. You can kid yourself consciously, but nearly all you underwent in there came straight from your subconscious. And a subconscious just doesn't know how to lie." Jerry changed the subject. "What's our next move? How soon can I go back after Mawson?" "You can't. Mawson's knowledge of this Carol can easily be turned to your disadvantage. He can use her to lead you to dissolution in there. No, it's much too risky. You're lucky you got out when you did." "But what about Mawson then?" Burgess tried to look confident. He failed. "We can ring up your headquarters and ask for another man. Or, if worse comes to worse, we can partition off this part of the hospital and just sit it out until Mawson runs out of atomic building blocks." "Which may take years," Jerry reminded him. Burgess turned his palms upward. "What else can we do?" "Send me again," said Jerry. "I know the score pretty well now. I know what to watch out for. I'm sure that with one more try I can get Mawson out of there." "Sorry," Burgess said, shaking his head. "As a medical man, I cannot permit it. You've had a bad shock. We'll try someone else if your outfit will send someone, and see what happens. If he fails, or if they won't supply us with any more men, then, well, you can try again in a few weeks if you're still game. But not now. Doctor, in a few weeks, Mawson will be so well in control of that universe that he may find a way to block the entrance. Have you thought of that?" "His universe is not a real one," Burgess began. "But that duplicator is real enough. It can make anything he decides he needs. And at any time he may get the bright idea of simply mounting his machine right at the entrance, so anyone stepping into that grey field will be powdered into atoms instantly." "That's true enough," admitted Burgess. "But my diagnosis still stands. For now, you are off this assignment. When I feel you're ready, assuming nothing else has succeeded meantime, I'll contact you at the base." "How do you know I won't be off on some other planet by then?" asked Jerry bitterly. "I don't," said Burgess. "I hope you are not, but there isn't anything further I can do about it. I'm sorry." "And what do I do in the meantime?" Burgess grinned. "Call up this Carol and go out on the town." Jerry shook his head at the last part. "No thanks. I prefer Carol to know nothing about it." Burgess shrugged and gave it up. "All right, Norcris. Rest here till you feel stronger, then you're free to go." Then he was striding off down the corridor. After a bit, Jerry sat up cautiously, let the slight giddiness subside, then swung his legs off the side of the cart and got down. Behind him, the door to Mawson's universe stood open on its wall of greyness. Jerry stared thoughtfully at it, then saw that the two interns who were guarding the opposite ends of this section of the hospital corridor were hesitantly half starting toward him. Jerry knew he could be through that doorway and into the greyness before they got within 10 feet of him. Chapter 4. Then his shoulders slumped, and he turned and walked toward the elevators. Burgess was right. He felt worn out and uninclined to make grandstand plays. Besides, he thought, thumbing the elevator button, it would be nice to see the real Carol again after her nebulous pseudo-self. He wanted very much to put his arms around a girl who wouldn't suddenly turn into something horrible in his embrace. The steel doors slid open before him, and the elevator boy leaned out to check the corridor for other passengers. "Down," he said. Jerry nodded and started into the elevator. Then he hesitated and looked back toward the room where Mawson reigned supreme, then back at the elevator boy. "Say," he said uncertainly, "that's a strange outfit for an elevator attendant in a hospital. I'd have expected an orderly in an all-white get-up." The boy glanced down at his uniform, the bright blue pants, shined black shoes, and scarlet jacket bright with twin rows of brass buttons. "I suppose it is," he said, "but I don't usually run this elevator. I'm from the hotel next door. I'm just doing this while the regular guy takes his coffee break." Jerry hesitated, then stepped toward the waiting elevator with its pale grey walls, and stopped again. His hand went to his forehead bewilderedly. "There's something," he said. Then Carol was beside him, slipping her arm through his. "Come on, Jerry," she said urgently. "We'll be late for our date." Jerry looked at her, then at the hotel corridor behind her, then again at the waiting elevator. "I have the oddest feeling something's wrong," he said. I don't remember coming over here for you." "You didn't," she said promptly. "I came for you, Jerry. This is your hotel, remember? Dr. Burgess said you'd had a bad shock, but I didn't know how bad till now." "Shock?" said Jerry. "What shock? What was bothering me?" Carol smiled tightly. Nothing at all. Come on, Jerry, darling." Again she drew him toward the elevator. "If I could only remember," he said uneasily, on the brink of that open cube of bright greyness. Then his eyes focused upon the brass buttons fronting the boy's jacket, and at his own shadow as it passed across those glowing hemispheres. As the shadow crossed a button, the colour would die and the button would be dull crystal, and then glow bright and brassy again when the shadow had passed. "Photoelectric cells," said Jerry. "Light-sensitive cells. Those aren't buttons, they're eyes. Multiple robot eyes." He staggered away from the boy. Carol stopped him. The elevator boy, suddenly half again Jerry's height, was towering over him, long steel arms extending like hooked telescopes toward him. "Get in, Jerry, get in!" cried Carol, struggling to push him forward toward those invincible metal clamps. In a fury of fear, Jerry fought her, grappled with her, twisted to avoid those extending robot hands that would drag him to destruction. And suddenly Carol was screaming his name, and her eyes were pools of terror and betrayal, and the leaping metal fingers had buried themselves in the soft flesh of her shoulders and dragged her back into greyness. Incredible energies came alive about her, and then there was only a shimmer of dusty, crystalline winds, and she was gone. Jerry found himself standing before the still, warm plates of the atomic duplicator in the room where Mawson had had his short-lived universe. Beside the machine, a squat cubic box dangled limp steel arms, its rows of photoelectric cells losing their golden glow. And then, as Burgess came hurrying in through the door, he toppled over in a dead faint. "So there is no such person as Carol," said Burgess, standing at the foot of the hospital bed. "She was only the figment of your imagination?" "Yes," said Jerry dully. "And all along it was Mawson I was really with. He was clever, all right. She was certainly the last occupant of that crazy place I was likely to attack. If he had not tried attacking me himself, I might be atom dust by now. A little longer, and he, I mean, might have talked me into that elevator." "Well," said Burgess, "I'm sorry this thing ended with Mawson's dissolution, but that can't be helped. You did your job well, Lieutenant." "Thanks," said Jerry expressionlessly. "To come so near death so many times," Burgess shuddered. "You have a remarkable constitution not to have cracked under such a strain. Lieutenant, you're a lucky man." And Jerry, his mind still filled with a vision of golden hair, soft brown eyes, and warm, eager lips, could only echo wearily, "Very lucky." No Shield from the Dead, by Gordon R. Dickson. Narrated by William Skye. No conceivable force could penetrate Terry's shield, yet he was defenseless. It was a nice little party, but a bit obvious. Terry Mack saw through it before he had taken half a dozen steps into the apartment, a light flush staining his high cheekbones. "This is ridiculous," he said. The light chatter ceased. Cocktail glasses were set down on various handy tables and ledges, and all faces in the room turned toward a man in his late 50s, who sat propped up invalid-wise on pillows in a chair in a corner of the room. "The comptroller is perspicacious," said the old man agreeably, waving one hand in a casual manner. "On your way, children." And the people present smiled and nodded. Quite as if it were an ordinary leave-taking, they pushed past Terry Mack and filed out the door. Even the blonde Terry had picked up at the embassy ball and who had brought him here strolled off casually, but in a decidedly less drunken fashion than she had exhibited earlier in the evening. "Sit down," said the old man. Terry Mack did so, gazing searchingly at the skinny frame and white eyebrows in an unsuccessful effort to connect him with something in memory. "This is ridiculous," he repeated. "Really?" The old man smiled benignly. "And why so?" "Why, the situation was so obvious that Terry fumbled, a little at a loss for words. Obviously you intend some form of coercion, or else you would have come to me along recognized channels. And any thought of coercion is obviously, well, ridiculous." "Why?" "Why? You senile old fool. Don't you know that I'm shielded? Don't you know all government officials from the 5th class up wear complete personal shields that are not only crack-proof, but contain all the necessary elements to support life independently within the shield for more than 20 hours? Don't you know that I'll be missed in 2 hours at the most, and tracked down in less than 60 minutes more? Are you crazy?" The old man chuckled, rubbing dry hands together. He said, "I'm shielded too. You can't get at me. And now the room's shielded. You can't get out of it." Terry stared at him. The initial shock was passing. His own statements anent the completeness of his protection had brought back confidence, and his natural coolness was returning. "What do you want?" he asked, eyeing the other narrowly. "Pleasure of your company," said the old man. "There are some very strong connections between us. Yes, very strong. We must get to know each other personally." It occurred to Terry that he had misinterpreted the situation. Relief came, mixed with a certain amount of chagrin at the way in which he allowed himself to show alarm. He had looked ridiculous. He leaned back in the chair and allowed a note of official hauteur and annoyance to creep into his voice. "I see," he said. "You want something?" The old man nodded energetically. "I do. Indeed I do. And you think you have some kind of a bargaining tool that is useful but might not be so if it became known to official channels." "Well," said the old man cautiously. "Don't waste my time," interrupted Terry harshly. "I'm not an ordinary politician. No man who works his way up to the 5th level of government is. I didn't get to where I am today by pussyfooting around, and I haven't the leisure to spend on people who do. Now, what do you want?" The other cackled. "Now, what do you think?" he said, putting one finger to his nose cunningly. "You are old," Terry said, "and therefore cautious. Consequently, you would not risk trying to force something from me, but almost certainly trying to sell me something. Now, what do I want? Not the usual things, certainly. Within my position I have all the material things a man could want, and within my shield I enjoy complete immunity. No one but the Central Bureau itself can crack this shield, and no one but they can prevent the conditioned reflex that stops my heart if for some reason the shield should be broached. I have a hold on every man beneath me that prevents him from knifing me in the back. There could be only one thing that I want that you could give me." He leaned forward, staring into the deep pouched eyes. and that is a means of getting at the man above me. Am I right?" "No," said the old man. Terry stiffened. "No?" he echoed in angry incredulity. Their eyes locked. For a long time they held, and at last Terry looked away. The old man sighed, sipped noisily from a drink on the table beside his chair. "Wait," said Terry. To his own surprise, his voice was eager, even a little timorous in its hopefulness. "Wait, I've got it. There will be a test. There always is a test every time a man moves up. His superiors watch him when he doesn't suspect it. It will be that way for me when I am ready for the 4th level. And you have some kind of advance information. You know what the test will be. Maybe you know the man who will administer it. You want to sell me this information." The other said nothing. "Well," Terry spread his hands openly, "I am interested. I'll buy. What do you want? Money? A favor? Protection?" "No." "No?" Terry shouted, starting up from his chair. "What do you mean by no? Can't you say anything but no?" A rage possessed him. He flung himself forward 2 furious steps to stand threateningly over the aged figure. "You doddering idiot! Say what you want and quickly. My 2 hours are nearly up. I'll be missed. They'll be here in a few minutes, the Bureau guards. They'll crack the room shield. They'll rescue me, and they'll take you into custody. To be questioned, to be executed. At my order. Do you understand? Your life depends on me." After a little, the old man chuckled again. "Yes," he muttered in a high-pitched old voice. "That's the way it'll be." Terry stared at him. "You don't seem to understand. You're going to die." "Oh, yes," said the old man, nodding his head indulgently. "I'll die. But I'm an old man. I'd die anyway in a year or so, maybe in a day or so. But for you, for a young man like you, the up-and-coming young governmental with everything to lose," he leered slyly at Terry, "your death won't be so easy for you to take." "I die?" echoed Terry, stupefied. "But I'm not going to die. They're coming to rescue me." "Oh, are they?" said the old man ironically. "Of course," said Terry. "Of course, why shouldn't they?" The old man winked one faded eye portentously. "Fine young man," he said. "Up-and-coming young man. Brilliant. Never a thought for the people he trampled on the way up the ladder. Dear me, no." "What do you mean?" said Terry. The old eyes, looking up suddenly, pierced him. "Do you remember Kilaren?" Kilaren?" "Kilaren," recited the old man as if quoting from a newspaper, "the beautiful young secretary of a provincial governor whose lecherous and unnatural pursuit drove her to suicide. So that one day, to escape the governor, she jumped or fell from a high window. And the people of the province, who had for a long time heard ugly stories and rumours, finally mobbed the office and lynched the governor, hanging him from the same window from which the girl had jumped. They said that even the fool had not spoiled her beauty, but that was probably false." The old man's words dwindled away into silence. "If so, what of it?" said Terry. "What's that to do with me?" "Why, you were there. You were the governor's aide, and when the mob had gone home and feeling had slackened off, you stepped into the gap and seized up the reins of government, handling matters so skillfully that you were immediately promoted to an underposted government city." "What of it?" "Why, it was all your doing," replied the other in a mildly reproving voice. "The rumours, the stories, the mob, even the suicide. Poor Kilaren, a pitiful pawn in your ruthless game to eliminate the governor in your mad dash up the ladder." "I never touched her," cried Terry, his voice cracking. "I swear it." "Who said you did? The type of mind that stoops to murder would never have gotten you this far. But you were the one who hired her, knowing the governor's tendencies. You were the one that gave her work that kept her, night after night, alone with the man. You preyed upon her fear of losing her job. You threw the sin in her face after she had committed it. You told her what she might have been, and what she was, and what she would be. You broke her day after day. In the sterile privacy of the office, you reviled her, scorned her, brought her to believe that she was what she was not, a creature of filth and dishonor. You blocked off all avenues of escape but the one that led through one high window. You killed her! No! Yes. Terry brought his quivering hands together and clenched them in his lap. He stared at the old man. Who are you? I was a friend of hers. We lived in the same hotel apartment. She had no family. I believe you knew that when you hired her. I see, said Terry. He drew a long, deep, shuddering breath and leaned back in the chair. So that's the story, he said, his voice strengthening. I might have known it. Blackmail. There are always fools that want to try blackmail. No, said the old man. Not blackmail, comptroller. I want your life. Terry laughed shortly, contemptuously. No knowledge that you have can threaten my life. They will come, said the old man, leaning wearily back against his cushions. As you said, the bureau guards will come, and I think I shall kill myself when I hear them starting to crack the shield around this room. They will come in and find you with a dead man. What will you tell them, Terry? Tell them? Anything I choose. They won't question me. No, the guards won't, but the bureau will. How can they raise a man to the 4th level when there is a 2-hour mystery in his background? They will want to know what you are doing here. I was kidnapped, said Terry. By whom? Can you prove it? And why? I've been held a prisoner here. By a dead man? No, Terry. The circumstances are suspicious. You walk away from the embassy under your own power. You disappear and are found in a shielded room with a man who has committed suicide. This must be explained, and in the end you will have to tell them the truth. And what if I do? Said Terry truculently. But the truth is so fantastic, Terry. So uncheckable. I am dead, and I am the only one who could have supported your story. These people who were here when you came in are common actors. They have no idea why I wanted you decoyed here. These are my rooms, and there is no obvious connection between me and the dead Kilaren. And perhaps I will decide to live just long enough to denounce you as a traitor when they enter. Ashen-faced, Terry stared. The Bureau will have to question you. They will clamp a block on your mind so that you can't operate the reflex that stops your heart. And they will question you over and over again because the Bureau cannot afford to take chances. You will go into a private hell of your own, Terry Mack. You will tell the story of your own evil to that girl over and over again, pleading to be believed. And they will not believe you. And in the end, they will kill you, just to be on the safe side. Because, you see, you might have been doing something traitorous in these 2 shielded hours. Terry's head bobbed limply, like a drunken man's. He made one last effort. Why? He said. Why do you do this? Your life for a girl who was no connection to you? The old man folded his hands. I was a little like your governor, he said. We all have our sins. I loved Kilaren, and the shock of her death wrecked my health. He cocked his head suddenly on one side. Listen, he said. From beyond the closed door of the room, a high-pitched humming was barely audible. It grew in volume, going up the scale. Terry leaped to his feet, and for the space of a couple of seconds he lunged first this way, then that, like a wild animal beating against its trap. Then, as if all will had at last gone out of him, he stopped in the middle of the room and closed his eyes. For a fraction of a moment he stood there, before a faint convulsion seized him, and he fell. With a faint smile on his face, the old man reached out to a hidden switch and cut the shield about the room, Uniformed guards tumbled through the door to pull up in dismay at the sight of the body on the floor. "I'm sorry," said the old man. "I must have turned the shield on by mistake. I was trying to signal someone. The comptroller seems to have had a heart attack." If you're enjoying the stories, hit the like button. It helps the channel get seen by the algorithm and grow. Thanks. No Substitutions by Jim Harmon. Narrated by William Skye. If it was happening to him, all right, he could take that. But what if he was happening to it? Putting people painlessly to sleep is really a depressing job. It keeps me awake at night thinking of all those bodies I have sent to the vaults, and it interferes to a marked extent with my digestion. I thought before Councilman Coleman came to see me that there wasn't much that could bother me worse. Coleman came in the morning before I was really ready to face the day. My nerves were fairly well shot from the kind of work I did as superintendent of Dreamland. I chewed up my pill to calm me down, the one to pep me up, the capsule to strengthen my qualities as a relentless perfectionist. I washed them down with gin and orange juice and sat back, building up my fortitude to do business over the polished deck of my desk. But instead of the usual morning run of hysterical relatives and masochistic mystics, I had to face one of my superiors from the committee itself. Councilman Coleman was an impressive figure in a tailored black tunic. His olive features were set off by bristling black eyes and a mobile moustache. He probably scared most people, but not me. Authority doesn't frighten me anymore. I've put to sleep too many megalomaniacs, dictators, and civil servants. "Warden Walker, I've been following your career with considerable interest," Coleman said. "My career hasn't been very long, sir," I said modestly. I didn't mention that nobody could last that long in my job. At least none had yet. "I've followed it from the first. I know every step you've made." I didn't know whether to be flattered or apprehensive. "That's fine," I said. It didn't sound right. "Tell me," Coleman said, crossing his legs, "what do you think of Dreamland in principle?" "Why, it's the logical step forward in penal servitude. Man has been heading toward this since he first started civilizing himself. After all, some criminals can't be helped psychiatrically. We can't execute them or turn them free. We have to imprison them." I waited for Coleman's reaction. He merely nodded. "Of course, it's barbaric to think of a prison as a place of punishment," I continued. "A prison is a place to keep a criminal away from society for a specific time, so he can't harm that society for that time. Punishment, rehabilitation, all of it is secondary to that. The purpose of confinement is confinement." The councilman edged forward an inch. "And you really think Dreamland is the most humane confinement possible?" "Well," I hedged, "it's the most humane we've found yet. I suppose living through a movie with full sensory participation for year after year can get boring." "I should think so," Coleman said emphatically. "Warden, don't you sometimes feel the old system where the prisoners had the diversions of riot, solitary confinement, television, and jail breaks may have made time easier to serve? Do these men ever think they are actually living these vicarious adventures?" That was a question that made all of us in the Dreamland service uneasy. "No, Councilman, they don't. They know they aren't really Alexander of Macedonia, Tarzan, Casanova, or Buffalo Bill. They are conscious of all the time that is being spent out of their real lives. They know they have relatives and friends outside the dream. They know, unless..." Coleman lifted a dark eyebrow above a black iris. "Unless..." I cleared my throat. "Unless they go mad and really believe the dream they are living. But as you know, sir, the rate of madness among Dreamland inmates is only slightly above the norm for the population as a whole." How do prisoners like that adjust to reality? Was he deliberately trying to ask tough questions? They don't. They think they are having some kind of delusion. Many of them become schizoid and pretend to go along with reality while secretly knowing it to be a lie. Coleman removed a pocket secretary and broke it open. About these new free choice models, do you think they genuinely are an improvement over the old fixed image machines? Yes, sir, I replied. By letting the prisoner project his own imagination onto the sense tapes and giving him a limited amount of alternatives to a situation, we can observe whether he is conforming to society to a larger extent. I'm glad you said that, Walker, Councilman Coleman told me warmly. As I said, I've been following your career closely, and if you get through the next 24-hour period, as you have through the foregoing part of your dream, you will be awakened at this time tomorrow. Congratulations. I sat there and took it. He was telling me, the superintendent of Dreamland, that my own life here was only a dream such as I fed to my own prisoners. It was unbelievably absurd, a queasy little joke of some kind. But I didn't deny it. If it were true, if I had forgotten that everything that happened was only a dream, and if I admitted it, the councilman would know I was mad. It couldn't be true. Yet, hadn't I thought about it ever since I had been appointed warden and transferred from my personnel job at the plant? Whenever I had come upon two people talking, and it seemed as if I had come upon those same two people talking the same talk before, hadn't I wondered for an instant if it couldn't be a dream, not reality at all? Once I had experienced a dream for 5 or 10 minutes. I was driving a ground car down a spidery road made into a dismal tunnel by weeping trees, a dank lavender maze. I had known at the time it was a dream, but still, as the moments passed, I became more intent on the difficult road before me, my blocky hands on the steering wheel, thick fingers typing out the pattern of motion on the drive buttons. I could remember that. Maybe I couldn't remember being shoved into the prison vault for so many years for such and such a crime. I didn't really believe this, not then, but I couldn't afford to make a mistake, even if it were only some sort of intemperate test, as I was confident it was, with a sweet, throbbing fury against the man who would employ such a jagged broadsword for prying in his bureaucratic majesty. I've always thought, I said, that it would be a good idea to show a prisoner what the modern penal system was all about by giving him a dream in which he dreamed about Dreamland itself. Yes, indeed, Coleman concurred. Just that, and no more. I leaned intimately across my beautiful oak desk. I've thought that projecting officials into the dream and letting them talk with the prisoners might be a more effective form of investigation than mere observation. I should say so, Coleman remarked, and got up. I had to get more out of him, some proof, some clue beyond the preposterous announcement he had made. I'll see you tomorrow at this time then, Walker. The councilman nodded curtly and turned to leave my office. I held onto the sides of my desk to keep from diving over and teaching him to change his concept of humour. The day was starting. If I got through it, giving a good show, I would be released from my dream, he had said smugly. But if this was a dream, did I want probation to reality? Horbit was a twitchy little man whose business tunic was the same rodent colour as his hair. He had a pronounced tic in his left cheek. I have to get back, he told me with compelling earnestness. Mr. Horbit, Eddie, I said, glancing at his file projected on my desk pad. I can't put you back into a dream. You served your full time for your crime, the maximum. But I haven't adjusted to society. Eddie, I can shorten sentences, but I can't expand them beyond the limit set by the courts. A tear of frustration spilled out of his left eye with the next twitch. But Warden, sir, my psychiatrist said that I was unable to cope with reality. Come on now, Warden, you don't want a guy who can't cope with reality running around loose? He paused, puzzled. Hell, I don't know why I can't express myself like I used to. He could express himself much better in his dream. He had been Abraham Lincoln in his dream, I saw. He had lived the life right up to the night when he was taking in an American cousin at the Ford Theatre. Orbit couldn't accept history that he had no more life to live. He only knew that if in his delirium he could gain dreamland once more, he could get back to the hard realities of dealing with the problems of reconstruction. "Please," he begged. I looked up from the file. "I'm sorry, Eddie." His eyes narrowed, both of them on the next twitch. "Warden, I can always go out and commit another antisocial act." "I'm afraid not, Eddie. The file shows you are capable of only one crime. And you don't have a wife anymore, and she doesn't have a lover." Orbit laughed. "Your files aren't infallible, Warden." With one gesture, he ripped open his tunic and tore into his own flesh. No, not his own flesh, pseudo-flesh. He took out the gun that was underneath. "The beamer is made of X-ray transparent plastic, Warden, but it works as well as one made of steel and lead." "Now that you've got it in here," I said in time with the pulse in my throat, "what are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to make you go down to the vaults and put me back to sleep, Warden." I nodded. "I suppose you can do that. But what's to prevent me from waking you up as soon as I've taken away your gun?" "This!" He tossed a sheet of paper onto my desk. "What's this?" I asked unnecessarily. I could read it. "A confession that you accepted a bribe to put me back to sleep," Orbit said, his tick beating out a feverish tempo. "As soon as you've signed it, I'll use your phone to have it telefaxed to the Registrar of Private Documents." I had to admire the thought behind the idea. Orbit was convinced that I was only a figment of his unfocused imagination, but he was playing the game with uncompromising logic, trusting that even madness had hard and tight rules behind it. There was also something else I admired about the plan. It could work. Once he fed that document to the archives, I would be obligated to help him, even without the gun. My word would probably be taken that I had been forced to do it at gunpoint, but there would always be doubts, enough to wreck my career when it came time for promotion. Nothing like this had ever happened in my years as warden. Suddenly Coleman's words hit me in the back of the neck. If I got through the next 24 hours. This had to be some kind of test. But a test for what? Had I been deliberately told that I was living only a dream to see if my ethics would hold up even when I thought I wasn't dealing with reality? Or if this was only a dream, was it a test to see if I was morally ready to return to the real, the earnest world? But if it was a test to see if I was ready for reality, did I want to pass it? My life was nerve-wracking and mind-wrecking, but I liked the challenge. It was the only life I knew or could believe in. What was I going to do? The only thing I knew was that I couldn't tune in tomorrow and find out. The time was now. Orbit motioned the gun to my desk set. "Sign that paper!" I reached out and took hold of his wrist. I squeezed. Orbit's screens brought in the guards. I picked up the gun from where he had dropped it and handed it to Captain Keller, my head guard, a tough old bird who wore his uniform like armor. "Trying to force his way back to the sleep tanks," I told Keller. He nodded. "Happened before, back when old man Preston lost his grip." Preston had been my predecessor. He had lost his hold on reality like all the others before him who had served long as Warden of Dreamland. A few had quit while they were still ahead, and spent the rest of their lives recuperating. Our society didn't produce individuals tough enough to stand the strain of putting their fellow human beings to sleep for long. One of Keller's men had stabbed Orbit's arm with a hyperspray to blanket the pain from his broken wrist, and the man was quieter. "I couldn't have done it, Warden," Orbit mumbled drowsily. "I couldn't kill anybody, unless it was like that other time." "Of course, Eddie," I said. "I had banked on that, hadn't I, when I made my move? Or did I? Wasn't it perhaps a matter of knowing that all of it wasn't real, and that the safety cutoffs in even a free choice model of a dream machine couldn't let me come to any real harm? I had been suspiciously brave, disarming a dedicated maniac. With only an hour to spare for gym a day, I could barely press 350 pounds. I was hardly in shape for personal combat. On the other hand, maybe I actually wanted something to go wrong so my sleep sentence would be extended. Or was it that, in some sane part of my mind, I wanted release from unreality badly enough to take any risk to prove that I was morally capable of returning to the real world? It was a carousel, and I couldn't catch the brass ring no matter how many turns I went spinning through. I hardly heard Horbit when he half shouted at me as my men led him from the room. Glancing up sharply, I saw him straining purposefully against the bonds of muscle and narcotic that held him. "You have to send me back now, Warden," he was shrilling. "You have to. I tried to coerce you with a gun. That's a crime, Warden. You know that's a crime. I have to be put to sleep." Keller flicked his moustache with a thick thumbnail. "How about that? You won't let a guy back into the sleepy bipads, so he pulls a gun on you to make you, and that makes him eligible. He couldn't lose, Warden. No, sir, he had it made." My answer to Keller was forming, building up in my jaw muscles, but I took a pill and it went away. "Hold him in the detention quarters," I said finally. "I'm going to make a study of this." Keller winked knowingly and sauntered out of the office, his left hand swinging the blackjack the committee had taken away from him a decade before. The problem of what to do with Keller wasn't particularly atypical of the ones I had to solve daily, and I wasn't going to let that worry me much. I pressed my button to let Mrs. Engel know I was ready for the next interview. They came. There were the hysterical relatives, the wives and mothers and brothers who demanded that their kin be awakened because they were special cases, not really guilty or needed at home, or possessed of such awesome talents and qualities as to be exempt from the laws of lesser men. Once in a while I granted a parole for a prisoner to see a dying mother, or if some important project was falling apart without his help, but most of the time I just sat with my eyes propped open, letting a sea of vindictive screeching and beseeching wailings wash around me. The relatives and legal talent was spaced with hungry-eyed mystics who were convinced they could contemplate God and their navels both conscientiously as an incarnation of Gautama. To risk sounding religiously intolerant, I usually kicked these out pretty swiftly. The one-time inmate who wanted back in after a reprieve was fairly rare. Few of them ever got that crazy. But it was my luck to get another the same day, the day for me, as Horbit. Paulson was a tall, lean man with sad eyes. The clock above his sharp shoulder bone said 5 till noon. I didn't expect him to take much out of my lunch hour. "Warden," Paulson said, "I've decided to give myself up. I murdered a blind beggar the other night." "For his pencils?" I asked. Paulson shifted uneasily. "No, sir. For his money. I needed some extra cash and I was stronger than he was, so why shouldn't I take it?" I examined the projection of his file. He was an embezzler, not a violent man. He had served his time and been released. Conceivably he might embezzle again, but the committee saw to it that temptation was never again placed in his path. He would not commit a crime of violence. "Look, Paulson," I said a trifle testily, "if you have so little conscience as to kill a blind old man for a few dollars, where do you suddenly get enough guilt feelings to cause you to give yourself up?" Paulson tried his insufficient best to smile evilly. "It wasn't conscience, Warden. I never lie awake a minute whenever I kill anybody. It's just, well, dreaming isn't so bad. Last time I was Alan Pinkerton, the detective. It was exciting. A lot more exciting than the kind of life I lead." I nodded solemnly. "Yes, no doubt strangling old men in the streets can be pretty dull for a red-blooded man of action." "Yes," Paulson said earnestly. "It does get to be a humdrum routine. I've been experimenting with all sorts of murders, but I just don't seem to get much of a kick out of them now. I'd like to try it from the other end as Pinkerton again. Of course, if you can't arrange it, I guess I'll have to go out and see what I can do with, say, an axe." His eye glittered almost convincingly. "Paulson, you know I could have you watched night and day if I thought you really were a murderer. But I can't send you back to the sleep vaults without proof and conviction for a crime." "That doesn't sound very reasonable," Paulson objected. "Turning loose a homicidal maniac who is offering to go back to the vaults of his own free will just because you lack a little trifling proof of his guilt?" "Sure," I told him, "but I don't want to share the same noose with you. My job is to keep the innocent out and the convicted in. And I do my job, Paulson." "But you have to. If you don't, I'll have to go out and establish my guilt with another crime. Do you want a crime on your hands, Warden? I studied his record. There was a chance, just a chance. Do you want to wait voluntarily in the detention quarters? I asked him. He agreed readily enough. I watched him out of the office and rang for lunch. The news on the wall video was dull as usual. A man got tired of hearing peace, safety, prosperity, and brotherly love all the time. I dug into my strained spinach raw hamburger and chewed up my white pill, my red pill, my ebony pill, and my second white pill. The gin and tomato juice took the taste away. I was ready for the afternoon session. Matrons were finishing the messy job of dragging a hysterical woman out of the office when Keller came back. He had a stubborn look on his flattened, red face. "New prisoner asking to see you personal," Keller reported. "Told him no, okay?" "No," I said. "He can see me. That's the law and you know it. He isn't violent, is he?" I asked in some concern. The room was still in disarray. "No, he ain't violent, Warden. He just thinks he's somebody important." Sounds like a case for therapy, not dreamland. Who does he think he is? One of the committee, Councilman Coleman. And who is he really, Captain? Councilman Coleman. I whistled. What did they nail him on? Misuse of authority. And he didn't get suspended for that? Wasn't his first offence. Still want to see him? I gave a lateral wave of my hand. Of course. My pattern of living, call it my office routine, had been re-established through the day. I hadn't had a chance to brood much over the bombshell Coleman had tossed in my lap in the morning, but now I could think. Coleman entered wearing the same black tunic, the same superior attitude. His black eyes fastened on me. "Sit down, Councilman," I directed. He deigned to comply. I studied the files flashed before me. Several times before, Coleman had been guilty of slight misuses of his authority, helping his friends, harming his enemies. Not enough to make him be impeached from the committee. His job was so hypersensitive that if every transgression earned dismissal, no one could hold the position more than a day. Even with the best intentions, mistakes can be taken for deliberate errors. Not to mention the converse. For his earlier errors, Coleman had first received a suspended sentence, then 2 terminal sentences to be fixed by the warden. My predecessors had given him first a few weeks, then a few months of sleep in dreamland. Coleman's eyes didn't frighten me. I focused right on the pupils. "That was a pretty foul trick, Councilman. Did you hope to somehow frighten me out of executing this sentence by what you told me this morning?" I couldn't follow his reasoning. Just how making me think my life was only a dream such as I imposed on my own imprisoners could help him, I couldn't see. "Warden Walker," Coleman intoned in his magnificent voice, "I'm shocked. I am not personally monitoring your dream. The committee as a whole will decide whether you are capable of returning to the real world. Moreover, please don't get carried away. I'm not concerned with what you do to the sensory projection of myself beyond how it helps to establish your moral capabilities." "I suppose," I said heavily, "that I could best establish my high moral character by excusing you from this penal sentence?" "Not at all," Councilman Coleman asserted. "According to the facts as you know them, I am guilty and must be confined." I was stymied for an instant. I had expected him to say that I must know that he was incapable of committing such an error, and I must pardon him despite the misguided rulings of the courts. Then I thought of something else. "You show symptoms of being a habitual criminal, Coleman. I think you deserve life." Coleman cocked his head thoughtfully, concerned. "That seems rather extreme, Warden." "You would suggest a shorter sentence?" "If it were my place to choose, yes. A few years, perhaps. But life, no, I think not." I threw up my hands. You don't often see somebody do that, but I did. I couldn't figure him. Coleman had wealth and power as a councilman in the real world, but I had thought somehow he wanted to escape to a dream world. Yet he didn't want to be in for life the way Paulson and Horbit did. There seemed to be no point or profit in what he had told me that morning. Nothing in it for him. Unless... Unless what he said was literally true. I stood up. My knees wanted to quit halfway up, but I made it. This, I said, is a difficult decision for me, sir. Would you make yourself comfortable here for a time, Councilman? Coleman smiled benignly. Certainly, Warden. I walked out of my office, slowly and carefully. Horbit was sitting in his detention quarters, idly flicking through a book tape on the Civil War when I found him. The tick in his cheek marked time with every new page. President Lincoln, I said reverently. Horbit looked up, his eyes set in a clever new way. You call me that? Does it mean I am recovering? You don't mean now that I'm getting back my right senses? Mr. President, the situation you find yourself in now is something stranger and more evil than any madness. I am not a phantom of your mind, I am a real man. This wild, distorted place is a real place. Do you think you can pull the wool over my eyes, you scamp? Mine eyes have seen the glory. Yes, sir. I sat down beside him and looked earnestly into his twitching face. But I know you have always believed in the occult. He nodded slowly. I have often suspected this was hell. Not quite, sir. The occult has its own rigid laws. It is perfectly scientific. This world is in another dimension, one that is not length, breadth, or thickness, but a real one nevertheless. An interesting theory. Go ahead. This world is more scientifically advanced than the one you came from, and this advanced science has fallen into the hands of a well-meaning despot. Horbit nodded again. The Jefferson Davis type. He didn't understand Lincoln's beliefs very well, but I pretended to go along with him. Yes, sir. He, our leader, doubts your abilities as president. He is not above meddling in the affairs of an alien world if he believes he is doing good. He has convicted you to this world in that belief. He chuckled. Many of my countrymen share his convictions. Maybe, I said, but many here do not. I don't. I know you must return to guide the reconstruction. But first you must convince our leader of your worth. How am I going to accomplish that? Horbit asked worriedly. You are going to have a companion from now on, an agent of the leader who will pretend to be something he isn't. You must pretend to believe in what he claims to be, and convince him of your high intelligence, moral responsibilities, and qualities of leadership. Yes, Horbit said thoughtfully. Yes, I must try to curb my tendency for telling off-colour jokes. My wife is always nagging me about that. Paulson was only a few doors away from Horbit. I found him with his long, thin legs stretched out in front of him, staring dismally into the gloom of the room. No wonder he found reality so boring and depressing with so downbeat a mood cycle. I wondered why they hadn't been able to do something about adjusting his metabolism. Paulson, I said gently, I want to speak with you. He bolted upright in his chair. You're going to put me back to sleep? I came to talk to you about that, I admitted. I pulled up a seat and adjusted the lighting so only his face and mine seemed to float bodiless in a sea of night. 2 moons of flesh. Paulson, or should I call you Pinkerton, this will come as a shock I know only a fine analytical mind like yours could stand. You think your life as the great detective was only a dream induced by some miraculous machine. But sir, believe me, that life was real. Paulson's eyes rolled slightly back into his head and changed their luster. Then this is the dream. I've thought... No, I snapped. This world is also real. I went through the same 4th dimension waltz as I had auditioned for Horbit. At the end of it, Paulson was nodding just as eagerly. I could be destroyed for telling you this, but our leader is planning the most gigantic conquest known to any intelligent race in the universe. He is going to conquer Earth in all its possible futures and all its possible pasts. After that, there are other planets. He must be stopped, Paulson shouted. I laid my palm on his arm. Armies can't stop him, nor can fantastic secret weapons. Only one thing can stop him, the greatest detective who ever lived. Pinkerton. Yes, Paulson said. I suppose I could. He knows that, but he's a fiend. He wants a battle of wits with you, his only possible foe, for the satisfaction of making a fool of you. Easier said than done, my friend, Paulson said crisply. True, I agreed. But he is devious, the devil. He plans to convince you that he also has been removed to this world from his own, even as you have. He will claim to be Abraham Lincoln. No. Yes, and he will pretend to find you accidentally and get you to help him find a way back to his own world, glorying in making a fool of you. But you can use every moment to learn his every weakness. But wait, I know President Lincoln well. I guarded him on his first inauguration trip. How could this leader of yours fool me? Does he look like the president? Not at all. But remember, the dimensional shift changes physical appearance. You've noticed that in yourself. Yes, of course, Paulson muttered. But he couldn't hoax me. My keen powers of deduction would have seen through him in an instant. I saw Horbit and Paulson happily off in each other's company. Paulson was no longer bored by a reality in which he was matching wits with the first master criminal of the Paratime universe, and Horbit was no longer hopeless in his quest to gain another reality because he knew he was not merely insane now. It was a pair of fantastic stories that no man in his right mind would believe, but that didn't make them invalid to a brace of ex-sleepers. They wanted to believe them. The stories gave them what they were after, without me having to break the law and put them to sleep for crimes they hadn't committed. They would find out someday that I had lied to them, but maybe by that time they would have realized this world wasn't so bad. Fortunately, I was confident from their psych records that they were both incapable of ending their little game by homicide, no matter how justified they might think it was. "Hey, Warden," Captain Keller bellowed as I approached my office door. "When are you going to let me throw that stiff Coleman into the sleepy vaults? He's still sitting in there on your furniture as smug as you please." "You don't sound as if you like our distinguished visitor very well," I remarked. "It's not that. I just don't think he deserves any special privileges. Besides, it was guys like him that took away our nightsticks. My boys didn't like that. Look at me, I'm defenseless." I looked at his square figure. "Not quite, Captain, not quite." Now was the time. I stretched out my wet palm toward the door. Was or was not Coleman telling the truth when he said this life of mine was itself only a dream? If it was, did I want to finish my last day with the right decision so I could return to some alien reality? Or did I deliberately want to make a mistake so I could continue living the opiate of my dream? Then, as I touched the door, I knew the only decision that could have any meaning for me. Councilman Coleman didn't look as if he had moved since I had left him. He was unwrinkled, unperspiring, his eyes and moustache crisp as ever. He smiled at me briefly in supreme confidence. I changed my decision then, in that moment, and in the next changed it back to my original choice. "Coleman," I said, "you can get out of here. As warden, I'm granting you a 5-year probation." The councilman stood up swiftly, his eyes catching little sparks of yellow light. "I don't approve of your decision, Warden. Not at all. Unless you alter it, I'll be forced to convince the rest of the committee that your decisions are becoming faulty, that you are losing your grip just as all your predecessors did." My muscles relaxed in a spasm, and it took the fresh flow of adrenaline to get me to the chair behind my desk. I took a pill. I took 2 pills. "Tell me, Councilman, what happened to the offer to release me from this phony dream? Now you are talking as if this world was the real one." Coleman parted his lips, but then the planes of his face shifted into another pattern. "You never believed me." "Almost, but not quite. You knew I was on the narrow edge in this kind of job, but I'm not as far out as you seem to have thought." "I can still wreck your career, you know." "I don't think so. That would constitute a misuse of authority, and the next time you turn up before me, I'm going to give you life in Dreamland." Coleman sat back down suddenly. "You don't want life as a sleeper, do you?" I pursued. "You did want a relatively short sentence of a few months or a few years. I can think of 2 reasons why. The answer is probably a combination of both. In the first place, you are a joy popper with dreams. You don't want to live out your life in one, but you like a brief dream every few years, like an occasional dose of a narcotic. In the second place, you probably have political reasons for wanting to hide out somewhere in safety for the next few years. The world isn't as placid as the newscasts sometimes make it seem." He didn't say anything. I didn't think he had to. You wanted to make sure I made a painfully scrupulous decision in your case, I went on. You didn't want me to pardon you completely because of your high position, but at the same time you didn't want too long a sentence. But I'm doing you no favours. You get no time from me, Coleman. How did you decide to do this? He asked. Don't tell me you never doubted. We've all doubted since we found out about the machines. Which was real and which was the dream? How did you decide to risk this? I acted the only way I could act, I said. I decided I had to act as if my life was real and that you were lying. I decided that because, if all this were false, if I could have no more confidence in my own mind and my own senses than that, I didn't give a damn if it were all a dream. Coleman stood up and walked out of my office. The clock told me it was after 5. I began clearing my desk. Captain Keller stuck his head in, unannounced. Hey, Warden, there's an active one out here. He claims that Dreamland compromises his plan for the free will of the universe. Well, escort him inside, Captain, I said. I put away my pills. Solving simple problems, such as the new visitor presented, always helped me to relax. Remember to hit the like button if you're enjoying the stories. Thanks. Irresistible Weapon by H.B. Fyfe. Narrated by William Skye. There's no such thing as a weapon too horrible to use. Weapons will continue to become bigger and deadlier, like other things that can't be stopped. In the special observation dome of the colossal command ship just beyond Pluto, every nervous clearing of a throat rasped through the silence. Telescopes were available, but most of the scientists and high officials preferred the view on the huge telescreen. This showed, from a distance of several million miles, one of the small moons of the frigid planet, so insignificant that it had not been discovered until man had pushed the boundaries of space exploration past the asteroids. The satellite was about to become spectacularly significant, however, as the first target of man's newest, most destructive weapon. I need not remind you, gentlemen, white-haired Coordinator Evora of Mars had said, that if we have actually succeeded in this race against our former Centaurian colonies, it may well prevent the imminent conflict entirely. In a few moments we shall know whether our scientists have developed a truly irresistible weapon. Of all the officials, soldiers, and scientists present, Arnold Gibson was perhaps the least excited. For one thing, he had laboured hard to make the new horror succeed, and felt reasonably confident that it would. The project had been given the attention of every first-class scientific mind in the solar system, for the great fear was that the new states on the Centaurian planets might win the race of discovery and bring a little order into this old-fashioned, inefficient fumbling toward progress, Gibson thought contemptuously. Look at them. Fools for all their degrees and titles. They've stumbled on something with possibilities beyond their confused powers of application. A gasp rustled through the chamber, followed by an even more awed silence than had preceded the unbelievable, ultra-rapid action on the telescreen. Gibson permitted himself a tight smile of satisfaction. Now my work really begins, he reflected. A few quick steps brought him to Dr. Haas, director of the project, just before the less stunned observers surrounded that gentleman, babbling questions. I'll start collecting the number 3 string of recorders, he reported. All right, Arnold, agreed Haas. Tell the others to get their ships out too. I'll be busy here. Not half as busy as you will be in about a day, thought Gibson, heading for the spaceship berths. He had arranged to be assigned the recording machines drifting in space at the greatest distance from the command ship. The others would assume that he needed more time to locate and retrieve the apparatus, which would give him a head start toward Alpha Centauri. His ship was not large, but it was powerful and versatile to cope with any emergency that may have been encountered during the dangerous tests. Gibson watched his instruments carefully for signs of pursuit, until he had put a few million miles between himself and the command ship. Then he eased his craft into subspace drive and relaxed his vigilance. He returned to normal space many days later in the vicinity of Alpha Centauri. They may have attempted to follow him for all he knew, but it hardly mattered by then. He broadcast the recognition signal he had been given to memorize long ago when he had volunteered his services to the new states. Then he headed for the capital planet Nessus. Long before reaching it, he acquired a lowering escort of warcraft, but he was permitted to land. "Well, well, it's young Gibson," the chairman of Nessus greeted him after the newcomer had passed through the exhaustive screening designed to protect the elaborate underground headquarters. "I trust you have news for us, my boy. Watch outside the door, Colonel." One of the ostentatiously armed guards stepped outside and closed the door as Gibson greeted the obese man sitting across the button-studded expanse of desk. The scientist was under no illusion as to the vagueness of the title, chairman. He was facing the absolute power of the Centaurian planet, which, in a few months' time, would be the same as saying the ruler of all the human race in both systems. Gibson's file must have been available on the chairman's desk telescreen within minutes of the reception of his recognition signal. He felt a thrill of admiration for the efficiency of the new states and their system of government. He made it his business to report briefly and accurately, trusting that the plain facts of his feat would attract suitable recognition. They did. Chairman Diamond's sharp blue eyes glinted out of the fat mask of his features. "Well done, my boy," he grunted, with a joviality he did not bother trying to make sound overly sincere. "So they have it. You must see our men immediately and point out where they have gone wrong. You may leave it to me to decide who has gone wrong." Arnold Gibson shivered involuntarily before reminding himself that he had seen the correct answer proved before his eyes. He had stood there and watched. More, he had worked with them all his adult life, and he was the last whom the muddled fools would have suspected. The officer outside the door, Colonel Corman, was recalled and given orders to escort Gibson to the secret state laboratories. He glanced briefly at the scientist when they had been let out through the complicated system of safeguards. "We have to go to the second moon," he said expressionlessly. "Better sleep all you can on the way. Once you're there, the chairman will be impatient for results." Gibson was glad, after they had landed on the satellite, that he had taken the advice. He was led from one underground lab to another to compare Centaurian developments with Solarian. Finally, Colonel Corman appeared to extricate him, giving curt answers to such researchers as still had questions. "Phew, glad you got me out," Gibson thanked him. "They've been picking my brains for 2 days straight." "I hope you can stay awake," retorted Corman with no outward sign of sympathy. "If you think you can't, say so now. I'll have them give you another shot. The chairman is calling on the telescreen." Gibson straightened. Jealous snob, he thought. Typical military fathead, and he knows I amount to more than any little colonel now. I was smart enough to fool all the so-called brains of the solar system. "I'll stay awake," he said shortly. Chairman Diamond's shiny features appeared on the screen soon after Corman reported his charge ready. "Speak freely," he ordered Gibson. "This beam is so tight and scrambled that no prying jackass could even tell that it is communication. Have you set us straight?" "Yes, Your Excellency," replied Gibson. "I merely pointed out which of several methods the Solarians got to yield results. Our scientists were working on all possibilities, so it would have been only a matter of time." "Which you have saved us," said Chairman Diamond. His ice-blue eyes glinted again. "I wish I could have seen the faces of Haas and Coordinator Evora and the rest. You fooled them completely." Gibson glowed at the rare praise. "I dislike bragging, Your Excellency," he said, "but they are fools. I might very well have found the answer without them once they had collected the data. My success shows what intelligence, well directed after the manner of the new states of Centauri, can accomplish against inefficiency. The chairman's expression, masked by the fat of his face, nevertheless approached a smile. So you would say that you, one of our sympathizers, were actually the most intelligent worker they had? He'll have his little joke, thought Gibson, and I'll let him put it over. Then even that sour colonel will laugh with us, and the chairman will hint about what post I'll get as a reward. I wouldn't mind being in charge. Old Haas's opposite number at this end. I think I might indeed be permitted to boast of that much ability, Your Excellency, he answered, putting on what he hoped was an expectant smile. Although, considering the Solarians, that is not saying much. The little joke did not develop precisely as anticipated. Unfortunately, Chairman Diamond said, maintaining his smile throughout, wisdom should never be confused with intelligence. Gibson waited, feeling his own smile stiffen as he wondered what could be going wrong. Surely they could not doubt his loyalty. A hasty glance at Colonel Corman revealed no expression on the military facade affected by that gentleman. For if wisdom were completely synonymous with intelligence, the obese chairman continued, relishing his exposition, you would be a rival to myself, and consequently would be disposed of anyway. Such a tingle shot up Gibson's spine that he was sure he must have jumped. Anyway, he repeated huskily. His mouth suddenly seemed dry. Chairman Diamond smiled out of the telescreen so broadly that Gibson was unpleasantly affected by the sight of his small, gleaming white teeth. Put it this way, he suggested suavely. Your highly trained mind observed, correlated, and memorized the most intricate data and mathematics, meanwhile guiding your social relations with your former colleagues so as to remain unsuspected while stealing their most cherished secret. Such a feat demonstrates ability and intelligence. Gibson tried to lick his lips and could not, despite the seeming fairness of the words. He sensed a pulsing undercurrent of cruelty and cynicism. On the other hand, the mellow voice flowed on, having received the information, being able to use it effectively now without you, and knowing that you betrayed once, I shall simply discard you like an old message blank. That is an act of wisdom. Had you chosen your course more wisely, he added, your position might be stronger. By the time Arnold Gibson regained his voice, the Centaurian autocrat was already giving instructions to Colonel Corman. The scientist strove to interrupt, to attract the ruler's attention even momentarily. Neither paid him any heed until he shouted and tried frenziedly to shove the soldier from in front of the telescreen. Corman backhanded him across the throat without looking around, with such force that Gibson staggered back and fell. He lay, half choking, grasping his throat with both hands until he could breathe. The colonel continued discussing his extinction without emotion. So, if your excellency agrees, I would prefer taking him back to Nessus first for the sake of the morale factor here. Some of them are so addled now at having been caught chasing up wrong alleys that they can hardly work. Apparently the chairman agreed, for the screen was blank when the colonel reached down and hauled Gibson to his feet. Now listen to me carefully, he said, emphasizing his order with a ringing slap across Gibson's face. I shall walk behind you with my blaster drawn. If you make a false move, I shall not kill you. Gibson stared at him, holding his bleeding mouth. It will be much worse, Corman went on woodenly. Imagine what it will be like to have both feet charred to the bone. You would have to crawl the rest of the way to the ship. I certainly would not consider carrying you. In a nightmarish daze, Gibson obeyed the cold directions and walked slowly along the underground corridors of the Centaurian research laboratories. He prayed desperately that someone, anyone, might come along. Anybody who could possibly be used to create a diversion or to be pushed into Corman and his deadly blaster. The halls remained deserted, possibly by arrangement. Maybe I'd better wait till we reach his ship, Gibson thought. I ought to be able to figure a way before we reach Nessus. I had the brains to fool Haas, and He winced, recalling Chairman Diamond's theory of the difference between intelligence and wisdom. "The obscene swine!" he screamed silently. Colonel Corman grunted warningly, and Gibson took the indicated turn. They entered the spaceship from an underground chamber, and Gibson learned the reason for his executioner's assurance when the latter chained him to one of the pneumatic acceleration seats. The chain was fragile in appearance, but he knew he would not be free to move until Corman so desired. More of their insane brand of cleverness, he reflected. That's the sort of thing they do succeed in thinking of. They're all crazy. Why did I ever... But he shrank from the question he feared to answer. To drag out into the open his petty, selfish reasons, shorn of the tinsel glamour of so-called service and progress, would be too painful. After the first series of accelerations, he roused himself from his beaten stupor enough to note that Corman was taking a strange course for reaching Nessus. Then, entirely too close to the planet and its satellites to ensure accuracy, the Colonel put the ship into subspace drive. Corman leaned back at the conclusion of the brief activity on his control board and met Gibson's pop-eyed stare. "Interesting, the things worth knowing," he commented. "How to make a weapon, for instance, or whether your enemy has it yet." He almost smiled at his prisoner's expression. "Or even better, knowing exactly how far your enemy has progressed and how fast he can continue, whether to stop him immediately or whether you can remain a step ahead." But, if both sides are irresistible," Gibson stammered. Corman examined him contemptuously. "No irresistible weapon exists or ever will," he declared. "Only an irresistible process, the transmission of secrets. You are living proof that no safeguards can defend against that." He savoured Gibson's silent discomfort. "I am sure you know how far and how fast the Centaurian scientists will go, Gibson, since I guided you to every laboratory in that plant. Your memory may require some painful jogging when we reach the solar system, but remember you shall." "But you were ordered to..." "You didn't think I was a Centaurian, did you?" sneered Corman. "After I just explained to you what is really irresistible." Thanks for listening. If you could hit the like button, that would be much appreciated. And subscribe to the channel to keep up with new releases. There are hundreds of stories on the channel already, and plenty more coming. And if it interests you, consider my Substack page. There I have stories that don't get published on YouTube. Most are free, with some other genres thrown in, and paid subscribers get exclusive novelettes and serialized novels. All ad-free in video, audio, and podcast form. Links in the description. And on screen now is another video you might like. So, see you in the next one.